Wendy O'Leary. We were just having a whole big chat. We've never met before. This is super exciting. It's so lovely to meet like minded people. Not only are we living in the same state, we have a lot of similar backgrounds. We're both obsessed about picture books, which I want to share with everyone here. But today, I wanted to speak to you specifically around self care and self compassion for educators. Because, Wendy, this past year or so, I've been working in classrooms again as a teacher substitute, and I can see it, right? It's deep, it's profound. There's a mental health crisis for teachers and educators and pediatric therapists. And I would love for us to explore this because I can see you're doing this work. You're already talking to a lot of educators, and I would love to share with our community not just the superficial, you know, top layer, but let's get into the nitty gritty and what you're seeing. So, first of all, to get started, please explain to us, who you are, your background, your passion, and what led you from being a children's book author now to working with adults.
Yeah, first, just thank you so much for inviting me on. And I was really enjoying our little chat beforehand. So I'm looking forward to continuing that here.
Yes.
And yeah, it's interesting, right? My work as an author, I often don't even call myself an author or a public speaker. I usually say I'm an educator. And when I say that,
Yeah.
really what I mean is that I'm passionate about all the ways that I can support people in living wholehearted lives,
Mm.
all the ways that I can help people to sort of cultivate this sense of self-nurturing and healing, well-being. And ways that I can do that include through my teaching and eventually then through writing books and public speaking. So all my books really have that in mind. They all have practice sort of embedded in the books and also opportunities for practice that are included at the back of the book because it's really important to me that these are like teaching tools. These are practice support tools or conversation starters for adults to have with children. So whether it be talking about emotions or self-compassion or cultivating some self-regulation skills, the books are sort of a way that I do that. But all the work that I do is really around this idea of um, hopefully being of benefit in this way of helping people to sort of cultivate that inner capacity that we all have. And so my background, just real briefly, is in health education. My master's is in education. And so again, I see myself as an educator and really love learning myself. And so with that, part of my learning has included, certification in um, mindful meditation. I'm a certified meditation teacher, certified yoga instructor, children's yoga, self-compassion. So I have sort of tried to, as I've learned new skills, I've tried to kind of develop them and learn more about them. And the ones that I have felt like I always teach from my experience. So the ones that I have felt really resonated with me and that I felt were really impactful, I've tried to figure out what are the ways that I can then share these tools and skills and perspectives with other people. So I've worked predominantly in wellness programming in the prevention field. So I did substance abuse prevention way, way early on in my career. And eventually, I myself started to practice yoga and meditation. I know I'd shared with you that when my children were younger, I knew nothing about these practices. But as they were getting older, I got exposed to both yoga and to meditation. And so for me, I started to see how it was completely changed my life. It
Mhm.
completely changed my life and was so beneficial. And so I thought about ways to start sharing it, not just with adults, but also the teacher in me who's worked with kids was like, oh, what are the ways that I can kind of make this accessible and relatable to children? So probably for the past like 15, 20 years now, I've been sharing these types of practices with children and with adults. So I kind of work that entire spectrum, but it's work that I do because I love this work and I share something that I'm really passionate about and that I really believe can make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And do you find this too, Wendy, from what we hear from our community and what I'm seeing from teachers and friends who are counselors and educators, what I'm hearing is this resistance to, there's the language kind of people's mouths are like, I'm stressed, I'm drowning, I'm overwhelmed, there's too much, I'm up early, I stay up late, all of it, right? It's a lot right now. However, what I'm also seeing on the other side of it, when we bring up this idea of how do you look after yourself? How do you, make a Zen den in your, teacher's office, or coming up with some solutions, or how do you take an afternoon off, or how do you, any which way, right? There's zillions of things we could talk about, shifting mindset, or practical or whatever. What I'm hearing is a lot of resistance, and I'm finding that educators and caregivers, but they're shifting to looking for solutions to fix, quote, quote, the children, which I get. I get that. But I'm seeing this sort of lack of openness to say, hey, let's start with ourselves, like a no kidding, and that isn't going to take extra time. It's not going to be challenging. Do you find that too? There's this sort of, it's almost like us women don't give ourselves permission to be able to look after ourselves. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm just finding a disconnect.
Oh, like 100% hear what you're saying. And I think, yes, there's this, I really appreciate that you brought up the women piece, because of course, so many of us in in these professions are women, not all, but a lot. And I think there is a societal kind of pressure for women to be the caretakers
Yeah.
and a lack of kind of understanding that it's okay to care for ourselves, right?
Mm,
And so giving ourselves permission to take care of ourselves, acknowledging that we, like every human,
mm,
deserves kindness and care. And we need to be able to be the ones to offer it to ourselves first and foremost.
right.
So I think there's that for sure. There's that piece, right? That we're dealing with. And I think the resistance also comes with a lack of understanding a little bit, I think,
Mm,
about what self-care could look like,
mm,
might mean. But and I'll dive into that a little bit. But first, I just want to say one of the things I always stress in my teaching is that we have to come here first.
mhm.
Come here before we go there.
Yeah.
And if we don't, then what we're offering here often sort of falls flat, right?
Yeah.
Um, my colleague Louise, who I have a book coming out with next year, she talks a lot about the cup of
Mhm.
self-compassion, right? And so like I have a cup that I use often when I teach, and I actually have a cup on my windowsill as a reminder to myself, like
Yeah.
what we put in the cup is what we offer, right?
Yes.
So what do we need to put in our own cup? So it's one analogy that I like to think of when I think about, the importance of offering something to ourselves. The other is, if you've ever seen sort of white water, right? Like if you've been on a river, right? And there's that's kind of what we've been dealing with, right? Things are, and I really, really respect and appreciate you naming how hard things are. Because I think the first issue is we got to see it and name it. This is a
Mm,
hard moment. Things are hard. And things are really hard for educators for a multitude of reasons.
yeah.
And our inclination is to focus on the children, right? To focus out here. I'm going to fix it out
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
Uh, and yet, it's so important for us to be able to kind of offer ourselves this kindness and care, kind of that um, as we look at those waves,
Mm,
on this river and that tumultuousness, right? What happens if we're just going downstream is we're getting buffeted all
yeah.
over the place.
Right.
And that's
Exactly.
how it feels for many of us, I think. And yet, if we just sort of pop off for a moment into one of those still pools,
Mm,
right? We can just pop, not to walk away from the river,
yeah.
but to give ourselves a little moment to replenish, to re-nourish, right? That's the moment where we take the drink, right? If we're whitewater rafting, we get into that little pool of still water, we take a drink, we re-energize, we give our muscles like a little chance to rest and relax. And the other benefit, so this analogy really works for me because the other benefit is that we also can see more clearly what's
Mhm.
ahead of us, right? And we can navigate it maybe a little bit differently instead of being reactive. Maybe we can make some different choices. And I think it's really important for us as teachers, educators. I do a lot of work with parents as well. And I'm in the early education field quite a bit. And so heavy demands, right?
Mhm.
Children have lots of needs. And if we don't give ourselves that moment, we're constantly reacting.
Mhm.
And if they're struggling, make no mistake about it, we are
Mhm.
struggling, right?
Right.
Like if a child we care about is having a hard time, we're having a hard time. If we're in a classroom and there's, you know, one child who's causing a disturbance in this corner and it's disrupting the lesson plan, we're struggling. Like it all affects us. So if we can't calm our own nervous system, understand our own reactivity, offer ourselves kindness and care, then we're being buffeted as we go down that river. So I
Yeah.
think it's really important to see like why it's so important for
Yeah.
us to start here
Yeah.
first and to say that it doesn't have to be um, so complicated or hard. Um, yes, there are all these lovely things we could do, but I think part of what the resistance is people are so they're in the river. You
Mhm.
don't have the time to even think about how to do this. They don't have the opportunity to kind of cultivate that. And so we need to really make it feasible and doable and understandable for people. So I think there, that that's a piece of the resistance. And societally, the last piece I would just say is societally, we're kind of told that it's not it's not appropriate to
Mm.
take care of ourselves. It's being
Right.
selfish or
Mhm.
self-indulgent
Right.
or, right, all of those things. And yet the research shows the complete opposite. And
Mm.
research, particularly around self-compassion, shows that people who are more self-compassionate and take better care of themselves have more to offer, have more capacity to take
Mm.
care of others. And I can say that 100% from my own experience that the more I have cultivated my own mindfulness and self-compassion practice, it has like dramatically increased my ability to be available and supportive to others.
Yeah.
So I think, we can't give from a dry well, an empty cup. We can't give from an empty cup.
Yeah. Right.
So really nurturing ourselves and doing it in ways that are sustainable.
Yeah.
So I talk about mindfulness and self-compassion as sustainable self-care. It isn't the vacation, which doesn't mean you don't need a vacation, or it's not the mani-pedi, which doesn't mean that's a bad thing to do. Um, but it's ways to integrate it into your ongoing life. It's just that little still pocket of still water
Mm.
that we can kind of pop off into.
I am loving this water analogy because I think about this all the time because the word drowning, I've heard more times from educators the last year or so, right? Even post pandemic. But I keep thinking about that. And I think about in terms of being on a canoe or a boat, right? And so you're sinking underwater, literally, you have no breath. And when you can come up and you have a community of people in your boat and you're going with the flow, the sun is shining and you've got your guide rails at the sides of the river. So you understand where you're going, there's a flow there. But I'm going to add that little side pool, and I can picture myself. But what a beautiful way to take yourself into that analogy, right? It gives us a little space in which to give ourselves permission that it doesn't have to be about us in the way that we're showing up in form right now, but it takes us away to think about, do I need to go into that little pool? Who else do I need on my little boat with me going down upriver or downriver? What are the guide rails? Like, what are the river banks? What are sort of those non-negotiables that are going to help me flow, right? And what's the fresh air? What's the sun coming out or the birds or whatever? So I think that's such a beautiful analogy to take us, and yours may be somewhere different if you're like a desert person or whatever. But I really resonate with that piece. And I was thinking about, I was talking to a teacher the other day, and I got off the Zoom with her. And my first thought was like, oh my gosh, why do I feel so energized and excited? And, I was just sort of like, I didn't know what to do with myself. And I thought, I was reflecting, like, what's different about that conversation? And I realized that I don't have this sense often talking to a fellow teacher of vibrance and energy and excitement. She works at a private school, right?
Mhm.
And I realize that I think more often than not, what we're hearing from our online community globally and when I'm in person and friends in that is the drowning piece. And
Mhm.
so it was really highlighted to me. I thought, gosh, if I had a magic wand, if only we could bring back the energy, the fun, and what you're talking about, the service that you're providing is I can see you're working to co-regulate with other educators. Just like our hope is that our aim, our goal as a teacher is to co-regulate with the students. You're providing a service to co-regulate them so they can co-regulate with the students, right? Because I can see people saying, oh, well, that's great. Wendy, you live off on a lake somewhere and you're practicing yoga mindfulness and you do all these things, you think, oh, that's great, that's good for you. However, we need people like you. We need healers around the world who are holding space for teachers so they can go out and do what they do best, right?
Yeah, and I think to also be so kind to ourselves as educators. I mean, I go into schools and classrooms. So I go into classrooms, but I also do a lot of work with teachers and professional development, and it's hard.
Mm,
I have, and I was sharing this with you in our little chat before, I have so much respect
mm,
and really honor the work that our teachers are doing. And I think it's hard to be in a profession that is that challenging and also often so undervalued in our
and
society.
underpaid too,
And
right?
undervalued in terms
Mhm,
of under-resourced, underpaid,
mhm,
under-supported,
mhm.
like in so many ways. And then
Yeah,
you added what happened during the COVID pandemic, right? So
yeah,
it completely understandable that teachers are feeling that way. And so for them to not feel like, oh, I should be, right? So I want to make sure I'm
yeah.
not giving any should be's.
Yes,
Messages, right?
right.
It's not about that, but it's, what might it be like? I wonder what it might be like if I just
Mm,
offered myself a little kindness in this moment, or if I just, you know, did a very brief little practice, or if I did something. And I do think, again, back to that resistance piece, it's
mm,
really helpful. I think a lot of times when we're talking about like trying to do something new or different, it can be really helpful to look at what the barriers are up front. And so
mm,
sometimes it can be helpful to be like, okay, so what is that resistance, right? So maybe it's that I've been told all my life that I shouldn't be selfish, that it's my job to give, that I'm right, like that's part of, again, that societally, many of us who go into caregiving kind of come by it in that regard, right? And so giving us the message that caregiving also includes ourselves.
yeah.
As a caregiver, I can also give care to myself, and it doesn't make me care any less,
Mm,
any less for all these other people. In fact, it enhances my capacity
mm,
to care effectively for others. Lots of research around self-compassion and burnout prevention.
mm,
So offering ourselves self-compassion and that acknowledgement that it's hard is a really important part. I was during the pandemic, I was in this, I'm involved with the coalition of early education professionals in my community. And they meet once a month. And they asked me to do like a little mindfulness, mindful moment before their meetings each month, which I was so honored because like the work they're doing to me is just incredible. And early education professionals, as you know, also incredibly undervalued, incredibly underpaid, really stressful work situation. And like all teachers, we're also dealing with the children's
mhm,
emotional struggles, which have increased over the years, right? So that also is impacting them. And It was during the pandemic. Many of them were still working. Many of them were dealing with their own young children. A lot of people in that profession are young moms. And in the middle, like it was probably the third meeting into the pandemic, and you could feel like it was so heavy. Everybody, kind of like you were saying, it was that like we're drowning, like this is a lot. And finally, somebody in the group over Zoom said, "This is hard."
Mm,
And you could feel that release valve. Like it didn't change that it was hard, and we're not trying to change it, right? Like we can't change it. It is hard. And we can still nurture and heal ourselves in the midst of it. And it starts with what you did right from the beginning of our conversation, which is just naming it like,
yeah.
this is hard. And then how do we then offer ourselves like some kindness and some care in the midst of that? What are some ways, some practices that we can use to kind of support ourselves? But you could feel the shift the minute the person said that,
Yeah.
kind of lightened the mood. And it was almost like they kind of popped into that little still water for like,
Yeah.
this is,
Empathy, right? Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
that's beautiful. So what I'm hearing from you, Wendy, is that, you're talking about the mindfulness practice as we approach this topic, right? So you're talking about noticing and naming. So that's step one, is just to notice and name and you're not alone. This is how I'm feeling, right? And this is what's going on for me. And then the second step is about being curious, right? You're talking about being curious, what's going to be a practice that I can sustain, that I can do quickly, that's not going to take a lot of extra time, not a lot of effort. What's going to make the biggest difference, right? And then thirdly, so I'd love to hear, what kind of practices specifically have you taught your educators and you've seen the biggest impact in a short period of time without adding more to their plate?
yeah. And I love that without adding more to their plate, right? And I think
Yeah,
that is a big piece of resistance, time, right? I
yeah,
just, I just
100%.
don't have the time. So I think the first thing that I want to make sure to say again is that yes, mindfulness and self-compassion, I kind of put them together a lot, but these practices I think of as sustainable self-care. For that very reason, it's not like you have to go off and have a vacation or even, you know, a walk with a friend, which again, lovely thing to do. Don't get me wrong, but in the midst of your life, what are the things you
Mm,
can do? And those are the practices that I like to share. So I'm going to share a couple of what I call sort of daily life practices, which doesn't mean like that we shouldn't do formal practice, right? Doing a formal, like committing to a practice for X number of minutes a day, sitting for 5 minutes and doing a practice supports us in our daily life practice. But I think even to just get started, having a few little daily life practices can be
mm,
really helpful because they don't add any time. They're integrated into what you're doing in your day. They don't really take a lot of effort. They do take intention, though. So I think
mm,
that's really important to say. So, um, any moment, any moment of deep presence, and for anybody who's done any practice, you know this yourselves, any moment of deep presence is so nourishing, right? Any moment that we can come back to presence is really nourishing. And it can be one moment. Even that is of benefit. So I think the first, I'm going to kind of group them, if that's okay. Um, can tell I'm really passionate about this, so it's hard for me to kind of lock down three. But under sort of three categories, I would say like embodiment practices um, are really important. And I think of self-compassion, if we're talking specifically self-compassion, I think of self-compassion when I teach it and talk about it, I talk about it as an embodied practice, right? Everything I teach from my own embodied experience. And so a few ways to tap into that, and the probably easiest one is what I call kind touch. And so in the mindful self-compassion program, they refer to this as soothing touch. And when I first took their training, it kind of made me laugh because I never knew it was a practice, but you might have noticed I've done this probably a few times already. I do this all the time. Yeah. So inviting your listeners to even just kind of play with like we put our hand, but in a kind and caring way. Just like if you had a friend who was having a hard time and you might reach out, right, and touch their shoulder, you could try that. Or a little touch here. I always did this. And I did it if somebody I was talking to was having a hard time. It sort of was a way I showed like connection and care for them.
Mm,
If it wasn't somebody like I felt comfortable actually reaching out and touching, I might do this. And I naturally did it as a way to soothe myself for many years before I realized. And what we know scientifically is that it releases oxytocin, the chemical for care and connection. We're caring for ourselves. Something as simple as that in the midst of your day. And I know a lot of people, I remember when I first taught this in my meditation group, and they were like, won't people think you're crazy? You walk around going like this all the time. I do it all the time. No one notices, no one cares. Like you can lean in and be like, oh, right. Like you can do it without being like making a big gesture out of it, but just a
yeah.
gentle, like putting your hand on your heart and offering yourself some kindness and care. And I do think it's helpful for people to know that if it's something you haven't done before and it feels uncomfortable, like try it out in private for a little while first.
Mm,
But think about it as a way that just like if a child was having a hard time, right? You would offer them a gentle, kind touch.
yeah, I love that.
It can take care of ourselves like that.
Yeah, it's the simplicity, right? I was thinking about in your book, It's Okay. At the main thread is, all these different things happen, and they say you say it's okay, I love you, I'm with you today, and it reminds me so much of the non-violent communication, Judith Hanson Lassiter. So
Yes.
I don't know, it was a year or two ago, a couple of years ago, one of my yoga teachers was talking about how human of me that Judith describes in the book. And I do that. It literally saved me. Wendy, it saved me. And I do the hand on heart, how human of me. So I was thinking about when I read your story that that's sort of the kids version of like, it's, it's okay. I love you, but I do that all the time. How human of me when I'm having these big emotions, or that's the first thing I think of, or I say, thank you. I love you, or I'm going to be okay. Or I just have whatever comes up for me. I just say a thing, in my mind. Um,
Yes. And
that
that,
and it's just hand on heart. And once I started reading about the like what you just said, the science behind the hand on heart, then I realized really what I was onto something. you know?
yes, for sure. And so interestingly, that's the second thing that I would suggest is kind
Okay.
words.
Yes,
So I
right.
also use how human of me.
Oh,
Um, but
amazing.
the other words that obviously I use from the book, right? We say, it's okay, I love you, I'm with you today.
Yeah, that's
I love
beautiful.
you. I often will say to myself, it's okay, honey, I've got you. I'm here
Yeah,
for you.
yeah,
We've got this, right? Like,
yeah,
so really offering yourself. And just a quick reminder about self-compassion is we're not doing it to fix, right? Like, there's
yeah,
no fixing happening. We're offering ourselves kindness and care because things are hard. That's
yeah.
all.
Right,
And it's sort of like when a child falls down and you scoop them up and you give them a kiss on their forehead. That kiss doesn't fix whatever, their scraped knee. Um,
yeah,
but yet they feel better
right.
because they feel cared for. And that's what happens for us. We feel better because we feel cared for. So the words that we use, right? How human of me. I actually, just used that the other day in a meeting. I was trying to express an opinion and I wasn't quite as articulate as I would have liked.
Right. And
And
you
then I
see,
said, just like everyone, sometimes I'm not as
yeah,
articulate or clear as I'd like.
and
How human of me. It's
yes,
fine. How human, right? So, and notice, start to pay attention to how often our tone and our voice isn't so kind.
yeah,
Um, Not
right,
to give ourselves further hard time about it, but to just be able to say, oh, interesting. This is kind of probably a habit.
right.
And that in and of itself does, oh, that doesn't feel so good. It's okay, honey. Everybody speaks unkindly to themselves sometimes. It's okay. So I do want to mention the three parts because I think it works really well with this part around kind touch and kind talk. So the three traditionally taught parts of self-compassion with the mindful self-compassion program are the first, which we talked about, mindfulness. This is hard. So you could even use a phrase using these three parts, right? So this is hard. And then the second would be that common humanity. you know what? Just like everyone, sometimes I make a mistake. Wouldn't that be lovely if we could say that to ourselves and our kids could say that to
Mm.
themselves, right? Or just like everybody, sometimes, things don't go my way, or things are hard, or I have a hard time, or whatever the phrase might be. So, the second part, common humanity. And then the third is self-kindness. It's okay, I'm here for you, or I love you, or what do you need, right? The sort of key question in the mindful self-compassion program, what do you need, honey? I'm here for you. So you could even cultivate, so that's called the self-compassion break, those three parts. They are integrated into the book, It's Okay. But to kind of have those phrases, for me, I know it really helped to have them at the ready. So I could do a formal, like sit for 5 minutes, call up an experience, and do the practice with it, mindfulness, naming this is hard, or this is a difficult moment, or this is challenging. The common humanity, just like everyone, and then the self-kindness. And the more I did it formally, even for 3, 5 minutes, the more I was able to then call up in the moment as something's happening, right?
Right.
So that is where the formal practice supports the daily. But if you have a quick go-to phrase like, how human
Mhm.
of me, or it's okay, honey, I'm here for you, or whatever it might be, it's really much easier. So you don't have to tailor it always to the moment. So playing around with some of these can be really, really helpful. And using them in combination, right? The hand on the heart with the words, uh,
Mhm.
really, really beneficial. The other one that I use, that's sort of the embodying practice. You see me going like this because I'm envisioning it as I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
Is the blanket of self-compassion I talk about, and I often share a story when I'm teaching a friend of mine when I was going through a hard time, and she was living temporarily in Australia. I'm in Massachusetts, so didn't have the opportunity to have our like ongoing conversations like we usually did. She sent me an email and I read it right before I went to bed, and things were really hard at that point for my family. And she said, I want you to imagine that my love for you is like a blanket.
Mm.
And I want you to wrap yourself in this blanket of love and care. And so I encourage people to kind of have some embodiment, some way to kind of imagine being held. Imagine somebody you love is hugging you, right? Takes no extra time. Little intention and practice, right? A little effort to kind of cultivate the imagination, but using some of those skills and tools.
Mm.
And for a lot of people, they'll say, oh, this is kind of like, oh, offering ourselves kindness, right? But
Right.
so much research around resilience in doing this. When we learn to be kinder to ourselves, we're not as afraid of making mistakes. We're not as afraid of sort of falling down. We can get back up. We're willing to do more things, and we're less likely to try and sort of blame others or paper over problems, right? We're able to learn from our own mistakes, and we're able to hold difficult. It increases sort of that window of tolerance where we can hold more and more difficulty. And
Mm.
back to what we were saying earlier, things are hard.
Yeah.
We want to increase our capacity to hold it. So I think the kind touch and the kind talk are sort of two of my biggest go-to practices that I teach people. And then the last would just be a breathing practice. One conscious breath, even one, can make
Mm.
all the difference. I always say you're breathing anyways, right?
Right.
So be aware of it. I had a kindergartner, a teacher in a school I was working in, told me that her little kindergartner's parent said, "Oh, we went to the doctors." And he asked what he liked best about school, and he said he liked that there was a lady who came in and taught them to breathe. And I think you're breathing anyways. But this
Mm.
idea that, right, we're breathing anyways, but can we stop and like pay attention to it and allow our nervous system, particularly since COVID, right? Our nervous systems have been really activated. You see it like more aggression when people are driving. There's a lot of agitation, and there's a lot going on in the world. And so ways to sort of just take that one breath, that one pause for reactivity to kind of calm our nervous system is really helpful. And so
Mhm.
the last thing you can see how I could go on,
Yeah.
but I don't know if we have time if you want to do a little quick practice.
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
All right, if we have time to do that. So this is a practice that's based on from the Mindful Self-Compassion program. It's based on their program, their practice of giving and receiving compassion. It's called One for Me and One for You. And
Mm,
for me, this is one that I find for caregivers. This is like one of my go-to, my person. This, the self-talk and the One for Me, One for You are sort of my go-to practices personally. Um, I know for me, when I was dealing with a friend who was in the process of dying and visiting with her, it was this practice that really allowed me to stay present
mm,
um, and was such a gift to me. And so now I just have used it so much that it kind of comes up naturally. So, again, formal practice supporting daily life. It is something you can use sort of in the moment. And so I'm just going to invite you, and if listeners are able to just close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. And then bring your attention just to your breath for the moment. So noticing the sensations of the breath as it moves in and out through the body. So we don't need to do anything special here, just noticing the sensation. Breathing in and breathing out. And now call to mind somebody who you care about who's having a hard time. It doesn't have to be um, something, really big, extreme difficulty. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, like a 4 or a 5, just to kind of get practiced at this. It's something a little smaller. You just want to call them to mind and what they're dealing with. And then think for yourself, what is it you most need to support them? So it could be acceptance, calm, whatever it is, just imagining whatever that is. And as you breathe in, taking that in for yourself. And as you breathe out, just releasing. And if you don't have anything in particular that comes to mind, you could just think one for me and release on the exhale. And now, as you bring that person to mind again, you might think about what it is that they most need. So it could be the same as you, or it could be something different. Maybe they need clarity or strength or courage. Maybe they need peace, calm, love, compassion. So on the inhale, continuing to take in what you need. And on the exhale, offering them what they need. So maybe you're taking in calm and offering out strength and courage. Or maybe you're taking in acceptance and offering out acceptance. And sometimes it can be helpful to just simply say, one for me and one for you. And now, as you're ready, I'm going to invite you to open your eyes to end our practice. And I did do an abbreviated, um, version. And of course, you can sit and do that formally. But as you get used to it, you could do as I did with my friend. I walked in, I saw her there, and I knew breathing in for me and out for you. And that's all I just said in my head, um, very quietly in the background. And I could still be present and have a conversation with her. And as teachers and caregivers, right, we're constantly, particularly with the mental health crisis that we're hearing about for children, we're also struggling as adults. And so it's really important not to forget the one for me.
Mm.
And if you feel like you need to, just keep doing one for me. You don't have to even do the one for you at first. Continue to offer the one for me and make sure that you're taking care of this person right here, filling your cup so that you're able to more effectively fill others. So, again, an example where our formal practice can support us then and sort of more easily just sort of weaving this into our day.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful, Wendy. I think what comes up for me through that experience is this reminder to when we have our hand on heart that we can also connect and ask for help, however that shows up for you. So, like you were saying, I've shared in my community, I lost my parents last year, and it was just a horrific year. And I find myself now with hand on heart and just say, thank you, I love you. And I picture them, and you can be asking for help. So even in, if you're in a classroom and, there's chaos and one child's maybe big behaviors has now, spilled onto had a ripple effect in the whole classroom, you can do that practice. But also sometimes we can just reach up and ask for source, speak to God or whoever, the universe, whoever is your guiding star, right? And know that there's a multiple, your angels, whoever that is, right? Or your loved ones, or I think that's a beautiful way to connect with yourself, but also to open up. I just find my shoulders open, my chest open, and I allow myself the opening in which to receive help, you know, from a a, a greater good, a source, if you call it that. So that reminds me of that piece as well.
Oh, that is beautiful. And I do think there's something about, right? Again, I think in our society, we're told to plow through.
Mm,
And I loved how the way you said it was like you were able to open up to allow, right? We have to allow that. And I think I would add, you might open up to help from a greater source. You might also open up to help from a person, right? And so I think, interestingly, in the book that Louise and I wrote, we talk about like, what do I need? Oh, I need to ask for some help.
mhm.
And again, I feel like in our society, we're very much sort of the culture is around this independence and,
Yeah,
white knuckle it kind of thing. Um, oh, help, please. Right? Like it's okay to ask for support. It's okay um, to ask for help, just like we're there helping other people.
yeah,
It's also okay for us to ask for help. And I think these practices open us up because we don't
mm,
see ourselves, right? The self-compassion, we then don't see ourselves, which often I think is the messaging in our society. We don't see ourselves as failing if we need some help because
right.
how human of me, as you said earlier,
Yes,
how
right, right.
human of me that sometimes I need help,
Yeah,
whether it be from the greater source or from the person, from my
Yeah.
neighbor or from my friend.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you said about the pools, I think I find that the clearer I am and that I'm able to ask for help, the signs that show up are, obvious and abundant. And I mean, then you just feel more and more in tune. So anyway, Wendy, thank you so much for sharing. How do we find you online? How do we connect with you and learn about your amazing resources and get connected with your body of work?
So I do want to just add one quick little caveat, if that's okay. Just to say to people, because I feel like I know for me sometimes I'm a dive all in kind of person. And so if it feels overwhelming, because I did share a lot of ideas and practices, um, a couple things to know, like start slow, give
Mhm.
yourself some reminders. I have my cup on my windowsill. I have like a rock that says it's okay on it. You see that? That
Right.
I put, right? So you don't even, I used to have a sticky note on my door jamb that said, "Feel your feet, Wendy," to remind me that I wanted to walk out into the world every day, present. So put little reminders up and don't
Yeah.
give yourself a hard time when you forget. Please don't give
Mhm.
yourself a hard time, right? We have conditioning to be racing through life. Um,
Mm.
and so be really kind to yourself, set an intention to practice. And when you don't, simply be, oh, yep, I got busy. How human of me. Like everyone else, this happens. And I'm going to remember I have an intention to offer this practice. So, any of those kinds of things can be so helpful just to get started. I don't know, you may be one of these people, or some of your listeners might be. I know I used to be where New Year's Eve, I'd set these resolutions that were completely not feasible or sustainable, right? Like the people who were like, I'm going to exercise every day for 2 hours, 7 days a week. It's
Right.
not sustainable. So make sure you do something sustainable. Tara Brach has a story about how she was in an ashram. I don't know if you've ever heard this one, but she was in an ashram. So she practiced all the time. Then she had a baby and
Mm.
they were no longer in the ashram, and she realized she wasn't practicing as much. And she wanted to recommit because she saw the impact on her life. She wanted to recommit to practicing every day. She said, but I had a back door. And I love this story because it's Tara Brach, right? A
Yeah.
very well meditation teacher. And her back door was if at the end of the day she hadn't practiced, before she put her head down on the pillow, she sat at the edge of the bed, one conscious breath. That was her
Mm.
practice. So really go kindly and gently with yourself, and also set an intention, right? Because without an intention, without planting those seeds, nothing will grow. So set that intention. So where you can find me, I have a website, um, wendyoleary.com, and you can find me on Instagram as well as on Facebook and on LinkedIn. And I always say, whenever I've spoken to you, whether it be in a personal way, in a training, a workshop, whatever, or in this kind of a venue, by all means, feel free to reach out if you have questions about anything that I said, like, oh, you said something about this. I don't quite understand what you meant. Please reach out. I do get back to people. I think I do this work because I feel it changes lives. And so reach out if you have questions. I'm always happy to get back to you. On my website, you can find some videos, some articles, as well as my email, contact information, and my newsletter contact information.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, my dear. It's
Oh,
been a pleasure.
you are so very welcome. Oh, could I make one last comment?
Yeah.
Sorry. And I have a book coming out next year on self-compassion for families. So with
Beautiful.
Louise Shaninger. So we're really excited about that. So that's another way you can find me through my books.
All right.
Thank you.
For sure, let us know when that one's available.
I will do that. It was
Thank
so
you,
nice
Wendy.
to meet you, Giselle. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.